Welcome to this session, which is devoted to looking at how satellite Earth observation and space technology can facilitate recovery and inclusion in post-disaster situations. So it is my pleasure to introduce Andrew Eddy, who is the moderator of this session, and who will, you will present every others? Yes? Okay.
So good morning, everybody. Off to a bit of a slow start here, but I think we have to kick this off because we have a very tight agenda. My name is Andrew Eddy. I'm the president of Athena Global. For the last 18 years, I've been managing a small management consultancy specialized in the application of satellites to disasters. We have a very distinguished panel with us today. I'll be presenting them in more detail later. Unfortunately, Bobby Piard, the Director General of the Centre d'Information Géospatiale in Haiti, is unable to join us. He did not get his visa, but I will present his presentation on his behalf very quickly. Then we'll have a presentation from Samir Belabès, a research associate at UNOSAT here in Geneva. And then Hélène de Boissesson of the French Space Agency and co-lead of the Generic Recovery Observatory ad hoc team that you'll be hearing about later will give a short presentation. And each of these presentations are limited to 12 minutes. After 10 minutes, there'll be a little bing, and that will mean it's time to wrap up. And the reason for that is to leave as much time as possible for the panel session. So the panel session, we have two other panelists with us. We have Ricardo Zapata-Martí from the European Union, a consultant to the EU who has a lot of experience working on the pDNA process, designing it and performing pDNAs, and he's recently back from Mozambique, and I'm sure will tell us a little bit about that. And then Kit Miyamoto, who leads Miyamoto International, which is a global structural engineering and disaster risk reduction firm that you've probably heard of. So without further ado, I am going to go through the presentation from Bobby Piard. I'm going to ask that we not have questions during these presentations, unless you have a short follow-up question immediately after the presentation. But we'll save the questions with the audience for the panel session. So, just very, very quickly, the Committee on Earth Observation Satellites came together about 4 years ago and decided that they wanted to create a project that would look specifically at how satellite data can be used to support the recovery process. Because satellite data is widely used now by the International Charter, by Copernicus, by Sentinel-Asia to support rapid response after disasters. But there had been no real dedicated application of satellite data to the long-term recovery process after major disasters. And so CIOS felt it would be good to define a pilot project that would allow agencies to explore new products that could be applied to support recovery assessment, but also recovery planning and over the longer-term recovery monitoring. And so after thinking about this for about a year, the CIOS community, together with UNDP and the World Bank GFDRR, came up with an idea on how this might work. And shortly after that, Hurricane Matthew struck Haiti. That was in October of 2016. And the impact in southwest Haiti was massive. And so we felt this was a good opportunity to create this pilot project, the Recovery Observatory, or RO. And these are the partners that were involved. And from the very start, I think you'll see that there's a heavy component of local partners. So while we were working with UNDP and UNEP and the GFDRR and the World Bank at an international level, it was felt that this should be co-led by Haitians. And so the steering committee includes the Centre National d'Information Géospatiale, which is the National Geospatial Agency, also ONEV, which is part of the Ministry of the Environment, responsible for environmental monitoring, and CIAT, which is an inter-ministerial body responsible for land use planning. So they're on the steering committee and co-lead this exercise. So the purpose of this was really to demonstrate the value of satellite imagery during a recovery process, to work with the recovery community so that we could have sustainable use of Earth observations, to establish better relationships between the satellite community and these international recovery stakeholders, and to foster some innovation on the application side. This is the area that we looked at in southwestern Haiti. So it's a fairly large area. It covers 3 entire departments of southwestern Haiti. And this is our timeline and where we're at today. So this is a very long process. We kicked this off in December of 2016, and CEOS committed to monitoring this area for a 4-year period, because we weren't sure after a major event just how long the recovery monitoring process lasts and when that recovery monitoring process becomes a support to development process. So this was, as a pilot, we felt it was important to have a long process and to try and understand exactly how these data would be used. And we were in the field with users. We had our first user workshop a year into the process, a little bit less than a year, and then a second one in 2018, and we've just back actually 10 days ago, both Hélène and I were in Haiti for another series of local workshops in the affected area and workshops in Port-au-Prince to discuss the status of the Recovery Observatory. So, as I mentioned, this project team is led by Haitians. It's led by the National Geospatial Agency. Bobby would be presenting if he were here and could have obtained his visa. The day-to-day management is decentralized, so each project team manages itself, in essence. And it's innovative in the sense that it's not like a typical UNDP or bank project. There's no budget for the Recovery Observatory. So every partner is bringing an in-kind contribution. The satellite agencies are contributing satellite data. We have contributions from value-added providers that are providing products, and we have users that are validating these products and sharing their experiences. It's just an example of the type of user needs that we collected coming into this. So right away in the first few weeks and months, we asked all the key users to explain what it is they wanted to assess and monitor over this 4-year period. And we rolled that up into a series of needs, and we designed a specific satellite data acquisition plan for the agencies based on that. And we obviously were monitoring the entire zone at low and medium resolution, but we also defined a certain number of hotspots where we felt the areas here had critical infrastructure or different needs or a critical environment. One in the middle here, if you look at this area here, this is Macaya Park. So that's the largest biodiversity reserve in the Caribbean, and it was flattened by Hurricane Matthew. So a big part of the Recovery Observatory has been environmental monitoring in the aftermath of the hurricane. We set up a number of themes that we wanted to look at, agricultural themes, natural areas, mangroves, health, terrain motion, land use, building status, watersheds, all the different sort of things that you might think of to look at as you're recovering from a large-scale natural disaster. And for each of these themes, we define not only a key user, but I think more interestingly, we set up focal points within the country so that each of these organizations had a person that they could go to who was responsible for managing the activity within that theme. So just some pictures from some of our local workshops. We had very high level of participation. The workshop that we had in the local area this time around had some 60 participants, including mayors from 7 different communities. And at the national level as well, we had workshops opened by ministers and a lot of participation from the national bodies involved in the recovery process. This is just an example of some of the satellite imagery that's collected. TerraSAR X, which is radar imagery, radar sat data, ALOS 2, very high resolution optical imagery, Pléiade, Worldview. So a wide range of different types of satellite imagery, all of which come together to support the generation of different products. I have some, and this is, the platform entry point, which is recoveryobservatory.org. You can go there and you can access satellite data, you can access satellite products, and you can read about the things that we've done. So I'm not going to go through each of these products. I don't have time. I have just a few minutes left. But we have a large number of products. This is an example of some free and open data based products. This is Sentinel-2 imagery on land cover. What we're trying to do is create sustainable capability within Haiti. So for each of these products, we came up with a methodology that can be taken on by the National Geospatial Agency, and the next time around, they'll be able to generate these products after an event, so they won't need outside help to do that. This is an example of urban area monitoring in Jérémie, and a close-up of that, looking at evolution of damage over time with a roll-up of that. This is an example of monitoring in Makaya Park to look at damage to old growth and regeneration of the forest and human impact as people came into the park to take out dead wood and then discovered they could continue to cut wood after the impact of the hurricane. This is some watershed management in Lekai in southern Haiti. So a wide range of different products, all generated on a pro bono volunteer basis with the free satellite imagery that was made available by the satellite agencies. From a capacity building point of view, and I want to say a few words about that just before wrapping up, this has really been the key thing that we've taken home as a lesson from this. We need to be sure that next time Haiti is better able to manage this themselves. So our methodologies have been designed around free and open data. They're leveraged by these commercial data sets that have been contributed. We're setting up a radar processing capability within the National Geospatial Agency, and that's going to be a web-based processing capability, so they don't have to download data. It all happens in the cloud. And they're going to be able to work through a European Space Agency tool called the Geohazard Exploitation Platform to generate radar-based products for terrain motion. And this is something that goes well beyond recovery. This is really into developing capacity that supports development. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. And I can take one short question if you have one. Otherwise, I'm going to pass the floor on to Samir. Okay, so Samir.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everybody here. So I'm Samir Pelabes from UNOSAT. So it's the Unitas Operational Satellite Program based here in Geneva. So and we'll go through today the UNOSAT's experience reporting recovery with satellite and Earth observation. So I will go through the background. We've been involved in several PDNAs since its inception in 2005, and UNOSAT contributed to several PDNAs since that, including like the Haiti one in 2010, and more recently I would like to highlight the agreement we had with UNDP and the SOP that we signed regarding the streamlined use of geospatial technologies, etc., etc. So, we are based here in Geneva, but we have 3 other outposted offices, one in New York, in Nairobi, and Bangkok. So we are an operational program since 2001 and fully dedicated to satellite imagery analysis and capacity development. So as I said, so UNOSAT has 2 main components. So one is mapping with analysis, research, innovation, etc., and capacity development. So hands-on, national and regional level technical backstopping, actually. So all those can be dedicated to the PDNA project. So let's go for recent PDNAs that we carried on at UNOSAT. So basically, so there was Haiti PDNA, Dominica related to the massive landslides that occurred there in 2015, Seychelles, Indonesia, and more recently Lao PDR. Okay, let's go and see the latest. I will focus a bit on the latest one in Lao PDR. So since recently with the UNDP, we signed an agreement. So based on geospatial information and other services that we will deliver to UNDP, and also make available to UNDP, to the UNDP and decision makers Earth satellite-based analysis, and also time critical for crisis and risk management that will be available for the colleagues of UNDP. So this SOP was signed in 2017 with the aim to streamline the use of geospatial technologies for UNDP country offices and regional hubs. So how to access to this service? During the emergency response, it's a free of charge rapid mapping. It's including within our rapid mapping service, so where UNDP can activate the UNOSAT rapid mapping service and access directly from its website, products analysis, etc. So for additional services can be provided that has to be funded. So like in country support of risk assessment, recovery planning at country level, and all other kind of technical support. So if we go through this last 2018, summer 2018 Lao PDNA, so the context, as you may know, it was flooding, and there was a post-disaster need assessment requested for the period between July to November 2018. Okay? So that included 2 months monitoring, determining the flood extent, the duration, and also some socio-economic impacts. Thanks to the use of satellite imagery and particularly Sentinel-1 radar images, using 207 images, we covered the entire country with the time series from July to September 2018, determining the impact on agriculture, environment, population, and also different statistics that were provided. All this using also the big data analysis based on the Google Earth engine. That was the main method used for this PDNA. So then several products were released between in September, October, and November 2018. So about some criteria, based on some criteria, based on some indexes that were requested. Like in October, so there was a product layered for UNDP, team and national regulatory authority, distribution of disaster effects that were released also in last October 2018, and other products on detailed maps for some provinces in Laos. So this is mainly how the process, if I can, the process how it is, and some annexes here where we can see some of the products that they were issued for this PDNA in Laos. So that goes from accumulated rainfall to cropland poverty indexes, etc. So some other indexes that were developed related to the population affected, composite indexes, and other cropland affected by the floods. Here again, some of those products issued. And then some maps, typical maps, PDF maps that were issued also related to the cropland maps with distribution of disaster effects by province in total per capita. Okay, so these are some of the examples. Before that, so we had some PDNAs like in Haiti, related to the last Matthew hurricane that affected mostly the western part of the country, so where the International Space Charter was activated, and then several analyses were carried out after for the response to this disaster. So then the PDNA was requested by the colleague of FAO with the objective to assess the losses in the photosynthetic activity in Grand Anse forest and the mangrove in the Sud departments of Haiti. So the timeline was between October and December 2016, mainly with the use of optical imagery, which is a bit challenging in this region of IT because of the persistent clouds. So, and then the results were mainly that 64% of the analyzed area had losses in the photosynthetic activity if we compare before and after the Hurricane Matthew. So, here are some of the results obtained. And here it was also, during this PDNA, a request to analyze a specific area of mangroves area in the Sud department of Haiti, so in order to assess the losses of the vegetation here. So another example of PDNA carried out by UNOSAT was one related to the tropical cyclone, I don't know if you heard about, Fantala 16, that affected the Seychelles, and particularly one atoll called Farquhar Atoll in Seychelles with coconut trees. So there were a lot of damage, but no fatalities have been reported at that point. So the PDNA was requested by the World Bank, and then using the satellite imagery, we assessed the damage caused to this island, particularly the coconut trees here in this atoll. Then here we can see some ground pictures taken in the atoll of after the passage of the hurricane. So thanks to the use of satellite imagery, we assessed about 250 hectares of potential coconut plantation before the cyclone were completely destroyed. So more recently, there was that earthquake in last September 2018, and the related tsunami in Palu, Indonesia. So and there also UNOSAT has supported the PDNA activities following a request from UNDP to provide timely building damage buildings, consolidate the building damage database, aggregate the damage information from various mapping agencies. As you know, during disasters, particularly such large disasters, so there are several agencies involved in the response, and one of the challenges is for the stakeholders in the ground is to gather all those informations coming from different satellite agencies. So we provided also dynamic decision support through live web map of consolidated building damage information. Here another PDNA that was requested by the World Bank was for the Dominica landslides in 2015 in the Caribbean. So where detailed mapping of all the landslides triggered in that island were mapped. So as conclusion, I can say that UNOSAT has been supporting PDNAs since its inception in 2005. UNOSAT is still providing timely satellite imagery analysis in support of emergency response and post-disaster and build capacity each year of hundreds of individuals worldwide using the GIT, geoinformation technology. I would like to highlight that the signed SOP between UNOSAT and UNDP in 2017 has established an operational framework to support UNDP country offices with satellite-derived analysis. And also we carried joint trainings with UNDP that have been already organized in Istanbul and New York to streamline the use of geospatial technologies, particularly in the support of the PDNAs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samir. We have time for one short question while Hélène loads the next presentation. Any questions for Samir? No? Okay. Yes, one. Could you stand at the microphone, please, and identify yourself?
So my name is Pelle Borgesson. I work for IUCN in Eastern and Southern African region. Has there been any requests to do a similar assessment after this cyclone Idai in Mozambique?
So So we haven't received yet, I would say, direct requests, but I know that there are some PDNAs actually undertaking ongoing.
And
Okay,
who does the requests? Sorry.
And Ricardo is just back from Mozambique, and during the panel session we'll talk about his PDNA experience in Mozambique.
So to answer to the question, who does the request, so answer in general, so we are a UN entity, so UN agencies in priority, I would say, then the member states, UN member states.
Okay, thank you, Samir. And our next presenter is Hélène, and she's going to present on opportunities and challenges to try and take this recovery observatory concept to a more generic level.
Hello, so I'm going now to try to show you what are the lessons learned from IET experience and UNOSAT different experience in uses Earth observation satellite images, and to try to derive some good practice and recommendations for an optimum use of those techniques. So, you remember the slide Andrew first presented, where we saw that during the emergency response crisis phase, there were a lot of Earth observation services devoted to providing very urgent imagery in support to this emergency response phase. But the situation is that after this emergency and crisis phase, generally satellite image acquisition stop. And there is no official and no organized mechanism to acquire satellite images for the PDNA and for the recovery planning and for the recovery monitoring. So in the framework of the CEOS, which is the Committee of Earth Observation Satellites, so it is a committee of space agencies in the world, we decided to investigate how satellite images could be useful during the whole recovery process from the very beginning to the end. And so this is what is called the Recovery Observatory project. So the idea behind this Recovery Observatory concept is to say that satellite images can make observations of a region that have been struck by a disaster, even if it's a very big region. We have satellites with coarse resolution, but covering the very large field on the ground. And so we think that satellite images can cover this full area, and then make some zoom if there are some hotspot like urban areas or environmental interest areas, and we can acquire more adapted satellite images, maybe with a higher resolution, much more precise on a geometric point of view, or with different wavelengths, in order to be able to observe those hotspots during the recovery. And we must never forget, when we are from the space images world, that space images alone can do nearly nothing. We always need ancillary data, ground terrain, information from the country and the local area to be able to analyze those images and to transform them into useful products. And here, so I will not comment, of course, all the details, but this is an example of what satellite imagery in red can bring to a number of information layers like buildings, shelters, IDP camps, transport infrastructure. And so all the lines you see here in red are some products, information products, where Earth observation is a major source of information. And overall, if those images have been acquired just after the, you have to do something, I don't know what. In blue, there are information layers where significant information from the terrain is needed. So you see that there are a lot of information in red, product information that can be acquired, and we have two kinds of interesting products. First, creating a baseline just before the disaster and just after, and then being able to monitor the situation according to the recovery needs. So Andrew showed you the experience on the post-Matthew hurricane in Haiti. And we have made some first lessons learned from Haiti and try mixing them with observations by UNOSAT or by other organizations to see how this could be applicable in a more generic way. So what did we observe? First, it was absolutely critical in Haiti to have a local and so national championship, CNIGS, which is a geomatics and cartography national agency, who is our colleague and counterpart, and who is the technical responsible for the project in Haiti. And it is worth noting that CNIGS and all other Haitian users are involved in this project without any fund, because we only provide in-kind data, in-kind human resources, but they are completely committed to this project. So in a more generic recovery observatory approach, there is a clear need that to have local users implicated and committed from the very beginning in the recovery observatory activities. We have understood very, very early that all those activities could only be worth if they were, if we did a lot of local capacity development too, and there is a strong need for this. And so in this recovery observatory post-Matthew project, space agencies are doing training and capacity building sessions mainly for the CNIGS. And we have started proposing some more simple training sessions for local municipalities in the south of Haiti. But in a more generic approach, we see that from the very beginning, if a recovery observatory is decided, there must be funds for this local capacity development implementation from the very beginning. What we have learned too is that we can define a few predefined standard products that can be of use for every actor of the recovery. And overall, because now you have some free and open satellite imagery from, for example, the European Copernicus program, or from American sources too. And with this free and open data, you can already provide annual land use maps that are very useful to the recovery process. But of course, those methods must be documented, and there must be a technology transfer to local users. Then what we learned from IT post-Matthew Recovery Observatory was the challenging linkages with the mechanisms that exist for the rapid mapping, the emergency phase of the crisis, with the International Charter Space and Major Disaster, with Copernicus Emergencies that do a lot of things, a lot of very interesting products during some days, and it is not very easy that those products, those information layers, are known by the people from the PDNA team, and even less easy that they are known by the local and national authorities. So those linkages between the space world, let's say, space imaging world, and the people from PDNA and from the countries is really a challenge. So we have, as space agencies, but I think as PDNA members, to try to predefine procedures so that those links are made as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And what we learned about IT too is that we have absolutely to reach to local people that have been touched by this disaster, because they are the first ones that are that they are the first aim we are looking at, and so we can develop an end-to-end approach, but it requires a lot of effort. It was in IT, it was quite long. It required several months to really start the recovery observatory post-Matthew. Even if everything was ready and national space agencies were ready to acquire images and so on. So we really need to decide to have a fast-track rollout and even to know how the end of the recovery observatory part will remain in the country. So what will be the legacy strategy after those elements, after those activities? And during working for more than 2 years and a half and 3 years in IT, we know that now we are starting more development activities further to post-Matthew hurricane for sure, but the border between what is really recovery and what becomes country development is, is not very easy to define. And so we must be very clear that sometimes we will do some development activities, but resilient, for resilient development of the resilience of the country. And then the last point is that the budget for transforming images into useful products requires budget. And in our case, we were very lucky because we had in-kind budget and in-kind human resources to transform images into products, and Copernicus Emergency Service, the European service, allowed us to transform, to create products, but in a more generic way. This will require budget too. So the main questions after this first aero prototype is how to develop this scalable and replicable recovery observatory. This diagram shows you what we would like and what we would like to perform. First, we would like on the upper line of the slide that pertinent and useful satellite image acquisition is guaranteed by the space images, let's say, agencies world, in order to feed all the different phases of the recovery process. And you see that you have different green boxes in this slide, and in fact our experience from 2 years and a half in IT shows that what we think is the most important that space agencies could do is to guarantee the first green box, to guarantee the continuity of satellite acquisitions just after the emergency crisis. It's here, sorry. Yes, to guarantee the continuity here between the emergency crisis and the starting of the post-disaster needs assessment, and to be able to provide information until the national recovery plan is decided. And according to the countries, to the situation and so on, the recovery monitoring can be decided or not, but the most important thing we have to do is to start the recovery process. I will go shortly on this slide, sorry, just to say that recovery phase requires very different information needs and image processing techniques than what we do in the emergency response phase. It's very different, much more difficult and complex. The imaging and mainly value-adding resources is really a challenge because it costs a lot of money. It needs skills, and it's not very evident in a lot of countries. We think that satellite images can, if coordinated, so can provide useful information from the event to the national recovery plan elaboration. And what is very completely indispensable is a strong involvement of local users, which requires the help of the stakeholder community, and that local capacity building, not only national and central, but local capacity building is required too, so that all those products are really useful. And we think that this approach can be scaled up, and that we can propose best practice in a more general way to PDNA actors and to recovery planning actors. So now there is an ad hoc team. Several people here are present at the table, is working on this, how to develop this scalable and replicable recovery observatory. We will publish soon an advocacy paper summarizing all the results of our team work. And in this summary paper, in this advocacy paper, we will define what could be the scenarios between what exists in the space imaging world for answering the emergency response, the PDNA, and the recovery process. And we hope to be able to go further into other demonstrators to be more, even more concrete and diverse than only one large experiment in IT. And thank you for your attention. And I will just finish by commenting this map. This map is the result of interactions in IT with Jérémy city, quite small city of Haiti, in southwest Haiti. And the first maps that have been produced with satellite images have been criticized, let's say, or we have had remarks from the people from the municipality of Jérémy who told us, but so that people can understand what is present in the map, you have to show what are very representative points like market, church, or a specific place, and show them on the map. So all the products that are produced in the Aero IT now are presented in this more accessible way, so that people from those cities can understand what is coming from space images. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hélène. So we're going to broaden this a little bit by beginning the panel session. But before we do that, I presented each of the panel members briefly. It's not possible for each of you to present yourselves, but maybe you could just, by a show of hands, answer the following question. So how many of you are here today representing a national government? Show of hands. A national government? Thank you. And how many of you are from international organizations? Thank you. And how many of you have ever had anything at all to do with a post-disaster needs assessment? Okay. And how many of you have ever, in your recovery work, used satellite imagery in any way? How many of you have extensively used satellite imagery? Okay. Thank you. So that gives the panel an idea of who we're speaking with. We've grouped questions into a series of 3 groups, if you like, and I'm going to lead off these questions and ask 2 panelists each time to give a response, and then we're going to open it up to the floor. If you have a question, if you can get to the mic, that would be great. Otherwise, someone can try and pass a mic to you and identify yourself. And what we'll do is 2 panelists, and then over to the audience, and then another series of questions. And if we have time, we'll just have a general session at the end. So the first series of questions is on the benefits of satellite technology for recovery. And the real question is, what is the main benefit of using satellites for recovery? Can we increase the use of Earth observations? And how can we do that to apply the full range of EO data to recovery challenges? And I'm going to ask first Samir from UNOSAT to address that, and then Ricardo.
Thank you, Andrew. So I would say one of the main benefits, actually, even if sometimes it appears that satellite imagery are costly, but it reduces the costs, actually. Satellite imagery allow to reduce the cost for for the PDNA itself, so for the study. So.
Okay, thanks. Ricardo?
I would say that one of the major advantages of satellite imagery is it allows for a rapid overview of the affected area and then focus your on-the-ground observation based on that. And additionally, particularly in areas where there is large flooding or inaccessibility, the satellite imagery allows you to have some first impression of those areas that are not accessible. Of course, as Hélène said, if you don't have good baseline data, just the image itself doesn't work much. So that's why you need that institutional capacity. But I would say that those are the two initial issues: rapid images that would allow you to focus, and accessibility limitations that by satellite you can sort of cut that problem.
Okay, and now from the audience, any of you have ideas on what you think the benefits of access to satellite imagery would be to support recovery, or comments on the presentations you saw, or questions? Nobody? Yes, please.
Good morning, I'm Emmanuel Duran. I'm expert in structure. I'm based in Geneva. I think one of the benefits in my recent experience, I've been working on the case of the Brumadinho Dam in Brazil. And I think one of the benefits really with satellite imagery is that you are able to kind of go back in the past, because these satellite images, they are somewhere in a computer. So you are able to find data from last month, 2 months ago, and so on. Yeah. Another benefit, this is really crazy, because you have all this data accessible. Another thing is, how can I say, I'm just new, I have to say, to the international government agencies and all. I'm really from the private sector. But let's say the power, in the presentation I saw just before, and thank you, was really good, all the presentation. I see PDNA everywhere. It was post-disaster. And sorry. I think one of the, maybe I go too far in the future, but one of the benefits is that we could go even before the disaster. If I just give an example, there is a fantastic, in my opinion, website from Norway. Norway have got all the country mapped with INSAR, with a synthetic aperture radar data. This is live, it's public, anyone can have access to this right now from laptop, computer, anything. So today, if I want to spend time on Norway, I can see some areas actually that are moving, like a potential landslide. So one benefit could be maybe someday, if we find the budget, if we have the power capacity, maybe partnering with private companies, we could have different countries, Seychelles, Mozambique, whatever, already mapped, and have people like me or others have a look every once in a while, and we could maybe prevent or mitigate some disasters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you raised a really critical point. One of the things that's come out in our work in Haiti is that you sometimes see things from satellites that you cannot see from the ground. So the INSAR example is a very good one. We're using INSAR data in Haiti to monitor areas along a critical road that is subject to landslides. They've been moving things around because they're building the road. And you can see areas that are placing communities at risk that the communities themselves were unaware of. And so satellites sometimes do see things that we don't see. Are there any responses from the panel to our question from the audience?
I would just add that at European level, so with the Copernicus program, we have a lot of different kind of satellites, Sentinel-1, 2, and so on, that are, and one of them is a synthetic aperture radar, Sentinel-1, that allows to do long-term monitoring of, ground movement, thanks to processing on the cloud through open platform. So yes, what you mentioned is achievable, and a lot of teams in Europe try to work in this direction so that we have a global monitoring of different kind of phenomena related to disaster risk. Yes.
So I'm going to move to the next series of questions. The theme of this conference was inclusiveness. We wanted to ask ourselves, what about inclusive recovery, and how can satellite technology specifically inform inclusive recovery? Can it help us to better prepare for disaster recovery? Can we increase our knowledge of vulnerable populations or poorer populations based on satellite data? And what can we expect in the future in terms of technological innovations that's going to facilitate recovery monitoring and inclusive recovery monitoring? So for this one, I'd ask Hélène to lead the response with a follow-up from Samir.
Again, what we have learned in Haiti and in other countries like France, for example, further to post-Irma hurricane in the French Caribbean, is that satellite images after a disaster show a very comprehensive and concrete results, concrete information layers that local population can really understand. And so this allows to raise the risk memory, the risk awareness in the populations. But this has to be done quite quickly after the disaster, because if you wait for 1 or 2 years, the population not really forget, but nearly forget what they experienced. And so I think we have, with what we try to do in this recovery observatory, we can bring significant improvement to the risk awareness of the population. And if we look at what we can bring to the scientific community that works on understanding risk, modelizing risk, and so on, Earth observation can bring significant input and data that help improving models and prediction models and so on. And so in this other domain, which is more scientific, I think Earth observation can bring significant improvement to all the disaster risk prevention and and early warning system too.
Thanks, Hélène. Actually, I fully agree with what Hélène mentioned, and particularly the critical time to release the products. Actually, if we wait a lot, then things are always forgotten, regardless to the magnitude of the event. But it's the human being is like this, and we forget. So results released within, let's say, the first weeks or the first month maximum. So will be there. Will be back of mind there. So the second point I wanted to highlight, so by the use of Earth observation, is that even if we are in the recovery phase or working in that post-disaster phase, but we are already in the preparedness for the next one. So with the Earth observation, we are getting new baseline. We are enriching the database, the local database, is particularly for some weak countries, weak communities, so where they can get more data related to their landscape, to their facilities, to their infrastructures, and this will help. I'm truly that this will for the next disaster that will occur. If you are in a seismic place, so you just wait for the next one, but there will be a next one. So that's what I wanted to add here. Thanks.
Okay, are there follow-on questions from the audience, specifically with regards to inclusion? Yes, please, go ahead.
So I can just add to what Helen said there, that because I mainly work with ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, and for us it's really important to see in the events that, if it's a cyclone or a hurricane or any disaster, how that affects the environment. And also with the degradation of the environment, we also see the vulnerabilities of the communities. And it's a combination there because the communities use these ecosystems as livelihoods, but the ecosystems also protect the people against disasters. So through these satellite imageries, we can really see that, and we can, as you said there, that we can prepare for the next disaster in a lot better way. I don't know if, just to add a question on that, is this something that is specifically included in the assessment tool? I'm sorry, I missed the first. I came from South Africa this morning, so I missed that maybe. Sorry.
It's an excellent question because I think it's something that we should hammer home on. It was something that wasn't evident to people involved in the Recovery Observatory as we were setting it up. And that is, the initial assumption was that to have a Recovery Observatory, we'd need access to all of this response data. There's a large volume of data collected during the response. And one of the things that we discovered very early on is that the recovery needs are very different from the response needs. And the type of satellite data that you're acquiring during the response does not meet the long-term recovery needs. So to be able to set up a proper recovery baseline, particularly with regards to environmental issues, it's very important at the time of the crisis to be collecting satellite imagery that creates an environmental baseline at the time of the crisis, as well as the types of imagery that are usually collected to coordinate humanitarian response. And so that lesson learned, I think, was a good one for the CIOS agencies, and it's something that we've taken home in terms of recommendations for operating procedures during major catastrophes. But understanding how to mobilize this complexity of satellite resources so that we get a little bit of everything and have the right baselines before starting is really important. I don't know, you're nodding, Ricardo. Do you want to add on to that? Or?
Yes, actually, the kind of satellite analysis that we need differs from when we look at the emergency needs, when we look at the recovery needs, and when we look at the recovery process. And that's where the definition of which indicators the satellite imagery will allow us to see is key. First, you want to see what the population is, where it's located, how is it being displaced for emergency purposes. Then you want to see what are the underlying fragility and environmental and other risks that will pose that population in a situation that if you just rebuild, as it were, it will be just worse. And that's when you move from the emergency needs to the actually assessment of the effects, and then what are your planning purposes in terms of recovery. If I think of the example that we are now looking in Haiti, had we had good mapping of vulnerable areas, some areas of Haiti would have never been inhabited as they are, but is the fact that they are. So now you know to use satellite imagery and other instruments to measure how to avoid that kind of fragility or how to build resilience in those areas. So I think it's a good planning tool, but you of course need a lot of underground information to supplement the images.
Hélène made the point in her presentation that at times, particularly over a 4-year period like in Haiti, you get a fuzzy boundary between the end of recovery and what is essentially just a development project. So where is the handoff? And that comes through very clearly on the environmental side as well, where at one point you just have a new baseline that you're developing from. And a year after the hurricane, it was clear that what was going to be rebuilt was rebuilt, and what wasn't rebuilt wasn't going to be rebuilt. So several of the products that we envisaged as long-term monitoring products weren't repeated because people said we don't need that anymore. What we really need now, 2.5, 3 years in, is still the environmental monitoring, understanding which zones have become more vulnerable because of the hurricane. We had a discussion 10 days ago about mangroves, and the initial assessment was, well, in terms of percentage, the mangroves only evolved about 7% in the affected area, so maybe there was no significant impact on mangroves. But if you look at the detailed data, the part of the mangrove that was most affected was the most vulnerable, and the areas that are not going to grow back. And so understanding how to use this information and to apply it into a development process and a longer-term environmental monitoring process is quite critical. Hélène, did you want to add something?
Yes, I think it's worth adding that, for example, in Haiti, post-Matthew, thanks to our initiative of Recovery Observatory, we we brought significant data for 2 World Bank projects directly linked to the impact of Matthew, but in order to build a more resilient agriculture in the areas that had been struck. So in this peninsula, we have been able to bring significant information that the World Bank at the first time didn't even thought about, thanks to satellite images. And so the practices, the good practices of the World Bank on those resilient agricultural territories evolved thanks to this technology. And I think it was a good point to be able to go to this development, or let's say a climate change adaptation in the agricultural world thanks to these satellite images.
Okay, thank you. We've heard vulnerable populations mentioned several times and vulnerability, but I think in a risk analysis context, there's another meaning of vulnerability, and that is the risk equation is hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. And how can we use satellite data to inform different parts of that equation? The role for hazard is pretty straightforward, and even to some extent for exposure, it's less clear on the vulnerability side, and clearly that needs to be married with other satellite data sets. So I think we need to think a little bit about recovery and vulnerability and recovery in terms of the different types of data that's brought to the table. So with that, I'm going to kick off this third round and ask Kit to lead the discussion, and that is really on how satellite data fits with other data sets and to what extent the use of satellite data can support early prioritization of response and allow us to reduce the impact of some of these catastrophes. So Kit, do you want to kick that off?
Sounds good. I just landed from, I just flew in about 30 minutes ago from California, so kind of a little bit sleepy, but that's what I can do. So I'm the guy on the ground, either collecting data for you guys, or they're using data or fixing things. So I have a little bit different maybe perspective here. So 2010 Haiti, we assessed about 430,000, this rapid, so-called rapid assessment, and 430,000 different objects. And I think using this satellite data is so critical to really to see the big picture of it, really what happened to really fast. I think that's such a critical component to really plan things out. And after that, using the part of the data to reconstruct about 12,000 houses. But important part of it, you can actually focus some certain affected area to actually build capacity in the masons, Haitian masons and engineers in a particular area, particular communities. So you can really, you can use the satellite data to really use as a capacity building tool. That was one of the main things, or just prioritization of a capacity building, you know? In 2018, Palu, there was an earthquake, and which killed about 2,000 people, and 1,500 of them died by the liquefaction, believe it or not. This is probably one of the first time in history it killed so many people by the actual liquefaction itself. It's not like a normal liquefaction. It was essentially what they call the turbulent flow. It's just horizontal landslide almost. Mm-hmm. So in Palu, I think the satellite image is so critical to really assess that area of this liquefied area and the potential hazard area, and communicate in a broader scope the community in Palu about risk exists. And obviously there's no place such as no risk. But I think it's really important to have the community to be able to understand that, to just see in the map which area is we should not reconstruct the schools or hospital. I think that's a really important tools there. Mexico City, 2017, the magnitude 7 earthquake killed about 400 people. Now, one of the things they did out there is I thought is very innovative. It was open source damage assessment. So it was communities, citizens, people, families, they see the damage. They just put some red or yellow. Now, are they accurate? Accurate enough for us. It was great for the first responders like us, the engineers and our user team coming through to really understand that really what happened to the city fairly quickly, because there are people just putting this information on live, really. And you can go into the place where the people think there's a huge damages and so on. So that, what they done in Mexico City, it was just something completely different. I never seen nowhere else, actually.
Okay, thank you, Kit. Ricardo, do you want to add to that?
I was thinking of our recent experience in Mozambique and how we would have benefited from a good satellite imagery analysis. Although there was an initial one, the World Bank conducted, it's a recent tool they've called the GRADE, which allows for a rapid assessment on the basis of satellite imagery. But the limitation is that if you don't have enough data on what the images are showing, it does not really give you a good, accurate economic value, because in the end, what the PDNA looks at, it's what the economic value of the damages, the losses, and the recovery needs are. So it allows you, as I said, to look at that imagery, focus on the humanitarian needs, and there was a number of users in Maps, Map Action, and others were there, they produced maps, and the GRADE allows to focus on areas that were critical for further assessment. Yeah. And that is where a number of technologies can cross over. I was thinking of the use, for example, of what you were saying, and satellite and mobile and cell phones, yeah. How people through cell phones can do that, send pictures of affected areas and help in the analysis. After the second hurricane cyclone hit Mozambique, Kenneth, we're also at a loss of information and inaccessibility, areas that are completely flooded or outer islands on which we didn't have any information. And satellite imagery would have been very useful at that point in time. Now, it's not yet too late. I hope we can do some work now, because actually we're preparing a full-blown PDNA on Mozambique that will go to a donors conference. And the best way to find for the country to portray a good image of their economic recovery needs is by having good pictures showing it. So I hope we can do that in these concrete days as we've done in the past. And that leads me to a thing that I've been concerned with. Do we have good standard operating procedures in which all the partners involved, World Bank, UN, EU, and others, can immediately engage without going through a process in which who's asking for this, no one asking for this, no one does it?
Okay, from the audience, any follow-on questions on this particular series of questions or on the entire session? Any follow-up questions? I have one for the members of the audience that raised their hand earlier when they said they had been involved in work on PDNAs. Would someone who's worked on a PDNA talk about how they did or did not use satellite imagery in the context of the PDNA? 1 and 2, yes. Are you first? Yes, could you stand up, please? I think the mic can come out of the stand. You can just lift it out of the stand and pass it to her. But okay.
Thank you. I'm Remedios Sendencia from the National Economic and Development Authority of the Philippines. Satellite imagery was very useful for immediate decision-making by higher authorities because it's visual. Authorities, policymakers know immediately where to focus on. So that's my immediate response.
Okay. Do you know where the satellite imagery came from, or you don't know? When you had it, were you aware of the source?
Yes, I was aware. One of the sources was from, well, I can't mention the source.
Okay, so no, that's interesting. That the source was not a conventional source; it was a classified source. So, okay. There's another question at the back here. Please go ahead. That people are laughing, but that's very, very serious. This is the whole issue of how to integrate classified imagery into a non-classified discussion on recovery is a critical point. There is classified imagery available, and sometimes it can be mobilized and used effectively, but you have to have standard operating procedures in place for that to happen. Yes, please go ahead at the back.
Thank you. My name is Richard Kuma from Kenya. I'm working the Kenya Livestock Insurance Program. This is a program which is used to minimize the impacts of drought effects to the pastoral livestock keeping communities. Satellite imagery is central to the index-based livestock insurance product because we monitor vegetation or forage availability to these animals using satellite images, specifically the NDVI. I'm aware where the source of that is NASA. and they are using the MODIS satellites. That's where we are accessing the data. We are using the satellite data to model an insurance product, which is more of asset protection as opposed to the conventional insurance products, which are asset replacement. In doing this, we are sustaining the economic gains other than replacing and taking us backwards. So yeah, it's quite useful to us going forward. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And that response points out very well the different types of satellite imagery. That's a widely available, easily accessible source of low-resolution imagery. I have a question here. Yes, please go ahead. Roberto?
My name is Roberto Paganini. I'm from UNDP. Just a few words to comment on the SOP that allowed us to deploy a EUROSAT expert and accompany the entire process of the PDNA. So it was more than just using the images and requesting the EUROSAT 4 images, but through the SOP we managed to allocate an expert to work together with the PDNA team for a couple of months. And I understand the experience was particularly good. I will not comment on the details, but I think, as you mentioned rightly, that images alone are not enough. So we need to foresee and allocate funding to allow then these images to be used at their best option. So I think this is a good practice, and I hope we will be able to replicate it beyond Laos. And it's something that was put at the service not just of the UNDP, but of the entire PDNA and the floor of the country. So I think we have to go the extra step and be able to do that. So this is a general comment. I do have a question in terms of the Recovery Observatory. And I wonder, what are the major obstacles now that prevent you from scaling it up already? I mean, since Haiti, we had a number of crises where I think this approach could have been useful. Many have been mentioned here, from the Iran floodings to Mozambique and Kerala and so on and so forth. It seems to me very intuitive and very logic that what you did should be done elsewhere. And at the same time, you were saying, well, it doesn't cost a lot of money because a lot of the agencies come with their own resources in kind. And yet, you are writing recommendations and not doing it. So I'm curious to know why, if you can elaborate on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Hélène, do you want to address that? You want me to address it? All right. There are a lot of challenges. Scaling is not easy. The very first one, if we look at what we're doing in Haiti, is it doesn't cost a lot because people are bringing things in kind, but what they're bringing in kind does cost a lot to those agencies. So to do that once over a 4-year period is very different from doing that 4 times a year or 8 times a year on a regular basis. If you had a recovery observatory, would that recovery observatory last 4 years necessarily? Probably not. The work that we're looking at in the generic RO ad hoc team is maybe a 6-month period that makes a connection between the imagery that's collected during a response, supports the PDNA process, and leads us to a national recovery plan, and then that work stops. And if the country wants to continue, since it will have some local capacity building component, the country can continue and find other resources, but if not, then it stops, and each one will be different. I think Ricardo mentioned standard operating procedures. The organizations that are involved in the PDNA process need to be better informed of what's possible and not possible, and where to go, and what they can get for free, and what costs money, and if it does cost money, how much money does it cost, and all of these questions. So Hélène mentioned earlier we're drafting an advocacy paper to basically explain what the state-of-the-art for the use of satellite imagery is to support recovery. But beyond that advocacy paper, that ad hoc team is also looking at different scenarios. Over the course of the next 6 months, we're going to be modeling out different means of institutional collaboration between the people involved in the PDNA process and the satellite agencies, and also map out some cost-based scenarios to say, well, if we want this level of effort, what does that cost and what do we get for it? So that there's a better understanding within the community of where the cost-benefit balance is on these different things. Did you want to add to that or anything?
No, thank you, Andrew. I just wanted to add that this recovery observatory, so with this first prototype on Haiti, is really something that was decided at the CEOS, so Committee of Earth Observation Satellite level, and is it so engaging? So the commitment from space agencies is quite large. So space agencies told us, as a aero leader, okay, we are right to test to do a large test on one area, and then we will decide how to go further. And so now what we would like to do is to convince them to maybe to start a demonstrator phase, but even more related to a pDNA process. And so we have to connect, to create this connection between pDNA process and space agencies. And then after, we hope that the CEOS framework will not be useful anymore, because those links will be written in the best practices of the pDNA and of the recovery planning and so on. But it requires a lot of time, because, you know, the connections only really start after 1.5 years and 2 years of work on IT between people like so Ricardo and the pDNA agencies, and the large number of space agencies in the world. And UNOSAT is an exception, because thanks to its UN umbrella, yes, it's more directly linked to the pDNA process, but all other members of the space community are very, very far from pDNA process and actors.
So there were two questions I identified. One was from Chiara, but maybe that was already addressed by Roberto. No? Yes? No? And sorry, there are two more questions at the back. So first, you, Madame, if you could take the microphone, identify yourself.
Hi, good day, everyone. My name is Liz Fabian, and I'm from the Commonwealth of Dominica. The satellite imaging post-Hurricane Maria was extremely important to us. There were a number of priority areas, but we got to see which were the priority of priorities in being able to offer immediate direct assistance to the different parts of the island. In the city section where our businesses were affected, we got to understand which areas needed most critical help. So satellite imaging is extremely important in being able to identify priority areas and giving assistance where necessary.
Thank you, Liz. And do you know where the satellite imagery came from? How you accessed it or not?
There was I can't remember which UN organization right now, but there were different supporting agencies who came, and there was this, I think it's a data section for the UN organization who provided support, and they worked directly with our GIS system within Dominica to provide that support.
Okay, thank you very much. If you could just pass the mic right to the man behind you.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Pranav Prasad, and I work with the International Labour Organization here in Geneva. As a part of our social finance program, we work on a lot of projects to support use of satellite imaging in risk identification and development of programs to mitigate those risks, whether it is through insurance or through financial services. One of the continuous challenges that we face is to make all these images more tangible, especially to the end beneficiaries, like the smallholder farmers that we work with, or the pastoralists that Richard here mentioned. Because looking at images is one thing, but how can they trigger responses? How can they trigger payouts? There needs to be a continuous need for making them more realistic through ground truthing exercises. So whether they are through automated weather stations or other mechanisms to explain it to the farmers, it's extremely critical, and also a costly exercise. So I was looking forward to hearing from the panel any mechanisms that they can suggest to make these wonderful satellite images and the granularity of data and matrices that the data comes in, make it more tangible and understanding to the end beneficiaries and the users who ultimately need to benefit from these images. Thank you.
So as a first initial response, what I can share with you is Hélène and I were in Jérémie in rural Haiti 10 days ago, And this is exactly the same thing that was stated by the mayors of these 7 communities that said, I have enough trouble myself understanding the information in this satellite image, but how can I take this to the farmers in my community and tell them what to do with this? We need to come up with a better way to get the information that can be extracted from the satellite imagery into the hands of local people who need that information. And actually we took an action within the RO to think through the National Geospatial Agency in Haiti on what types of information products we could have that would be downstream products based on the satellite imagery, but not actually satellite images. And I don't know if anybody wants to add to that, Samir and then Kit.
So thank you, Andrew. I think within the same, so what I would like to highlight, so now there's a lot of satellite imagery available everywhere, so a lot of platforms, but it's more important for the community, at the community level, it's the analysis of the satellite imagery. It's not really the local community or the countries, it's not the satellite imagery and the data itself, but the analysis and the extraction of the information out of that satellite imagery that is important and it matters to at the country level or community level.
So it's kind of related to that, actually. So we collaborated with the NASA JPA. We means the state of California. I'm a seismic safety commissioner there. And one of the things we do is use the laser technology to really map exactly what buildings look like in a city. Then after earthquake happens, you can see the movement of those buildings. Then based on the movement we can assign the heavily damaged or medium damage or low damage or no damage. And that technology being used to test it in Napa earthquake in California 2015 and also the Nepal event in Mexico, and it's come up to really good. So, I was talking about, we assessed 430,000 buildings. That's a massive effort, back in 2010. It was very expensive to do that. By using a satellite image, that kind of technology, it's really fast, cost-effective. You can really understand what really happened on the ground really fast. And easy to see, red, yellow, green.
Thanks, Kit. I think that is important, and it highlights something we've said several times already, which is the need for good baseline data. And each country, I think, needs to think about what is a realistic objective to achieve in terms of baseline data. Obviously, the baseline data that the state of California can finance is not the same as in every other part of the world. But in every part of the world, we can do and should do a better job of collecting baseline data and come up with some standard products that we could use after these events. So we've come close to the end of the session. I'm going to pass the microphone over to Hélène, and maybe you can give us some closing remarks based on what you've heard during the panel discussion and your impressions that you will take away from the session and back to this generic RO ad hoc team.
Thank you. So first, thank you for your participation, for your questions. And I noticed that the people in the rooms that had already used satellite imagery thought it was extremely useful and sometimes the only information source in some situations. So I think we are on the right way, but it's very long and sometimes difficult to make some procedures evolve and to integrate some new information source in such powerful methods like PDNA or other methods. So I hope that with the concourse of people here around the table that are part of PDNA teams and so on, we will demonstrate by the example. Because we don't want to put satellite images where they are not useful. We just and we do not want to say that satellite images can do everything and it's a miracle tool. It's not true. But in a lot of cases, it can bring really significant information that doesn't exist anywhere else. And so this is this value of this technique that becomes more and more accessible to everybody. And thanks to maybe some mobile apps and so on, that maybe we will, with the help of technology, digital technology, we will manage giving access to those information layers derived from satellite images. And so last week in Haiti, we were with the civil protection in regional, so civil protection. They were all working with WhatsApp and mobile phones every day. And this is another way of giving access to our products, and I think that more than having a web portal and so on, which is indispensable, we must go to this numeric and digital improved access for the people that are on the ground and that are the ones who are the most important in such situations.
Okay, well, thank you, Hélène, and thank you, all of you, for making this a very participatory and engaging session. The panelists are here for a few more minutes if you want to grab them before they leave the room. And thank you for joining us today. It's been a good session.